Our next panel discussion addresses a much anticipated aspect of modern marketing. Nowadays, consumers expect more from businesses than ever before. They want companies to stand up for important causes and make a positive impact on the world. Please help me welcome to the stage our moderator, Mr. Demetrius Washington, Senior Manager of Installation at Jack Henry & Associates, Mr. Jack Ebert, President at Driven Media, Catharine Montgomery, Founder and CEO at Better Together, and Miss Corinne, I believe it's Guirgis, I hope? Okay, perfect. Director of Strategy at Curium Agency. Now, the topic of this discussion is the corporate dilemma, taking a stand on society issues. Thank you.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. So again, my name is Demetrius Washington, and I am going to start off today telling a little bit of a story about 2020. We kind of talked about 2020 earlier, and that was a pivotal moment for a lot of our companies. And so in 2020, if you don't remember, we had the racial reckoning after the murder of George Floyd. And so for our company, what we decided to do is that we put together a panel discussion. First time we've ever addressed anything like this in the history, 45-year history of our company. We put together this internal panel discussion just to talk about racial equity within our workplace. And at the time, there were some discussions about, hey, should we have done something sooner? Should we have talked about this when Ahmaud Arbery was killed, or Breonna Taylor, some of the earlier societal issues that were going on? And that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. When do you address those societal issues? Should you address those societal issues? And so I have a number of questions that I'm going to be asking the panel here. I'm sure they're all prepared for them, but if you have any questions, feel free to join in as well. I'm going to start off, and I'm going to kind of target some questions, but you all can feel free to chime in when you want to. And so let's start off. I'm going to start off with Jack. And so, do you believe that companies have any responsibility to address societal issues?
I don't necessarily think companies have a responsibility, but it's common sense to address societal issues. A lot of people and a lot of organizations think that the moment they put themselves in the arena of societal issues, that they're asking for trouble. But that's not necessarily the case. And no matter what you do, trouble does come. When it came to my company and participating in sponsoring and help the production of Northport Pride Fest, which was our town's first ever celebration of pride as a symbol of moving pride, not from just urban areas to the suburbs, of course there was pushback. Of course there were people that were upset, of course. But there were also the people that were so inspired, that were so moved, that were so grateful. There were the parents that came up to us of children who were talking about how fortunate that they were to have this in the town and how grateful they were that their child was now feeling like they were at home. And it's a crazy feeling to be part of something so big, yet also so small. And so when you ask, do companies have a responsibility? It's not necessarily that they have a responsibility, but it's common sense to take the initiative when it comes to societal issues, because unless you take action, there will never be change.
Well, can you hear me? I do have to say that people don't have common sense. So I feel like you have to have a responsibility to focus on social issues, or it won't happen at all, Yeah. Unless somebody is holding you accountable and making sure that you actually do what you need to do, you're not just going to do it on your own.
I will say as well that this generation, talking, younger millennials, Gen Z, and definitely Gen Alpha, are very focused on companies and brands who are taking a stand in any which way, in a genuine way, an authentic way. There's studies out there that say right now that 92% of Gen Zs believe that authenticity is the most important value for a brand to have. Just behind that, followed by a social stance. And really those two things work hand in hand. So not only do I believe that companies have a responsibility to speak on and to take a stance on social issues, but they have a responsibility to do so authentically. They have a responsibility to do their research, to do their homework, to have the right conversations, and to do that in a way that, yes, I understand as a great deal of pressure, especially if, you know, they haven't done so before, but to make sure that they're doing it by having the right conversations with the people who are driving change and progress behind that social issue, so that they can integrate and be a part of it in a way and be comfortable taking a back seat while still using their platform.
Awesome. So you, Catharine and Corinne, you just mentioned two words that I want to kind of drill in on. Catharine, you talked about accountability, and Corinne, you talked about authenticity. So I guess I'll start off with Catharine. Question for you: how do companies make sure that when they take a stance on societal issues, they are aligned with their company's mission and vision?
Yeah, well, it takes more than just one time of supporting a cause to have that mission and vision of actually, you know, caring about social impact. So people are going to see right through a company who one time they donate money or they go into a community and they do X, Y, and Z. It really takes a long period of time to be authentic about it, like you mentioned. Like when you mentioned George Floyd, when he was murdered, a lot of companies donated like millions of dollars to nonprofits, what we thought were Black community organizations, but a Washington Post article said that it wasn't true. Nobody knows where that money went. And so really it was a bunch of companies saying, oh, look at us, we're doing good, now I can wash my hands clean of that and move on. And we see right through that. And you're right, that Gen Z, Gen Alpha, young millennials are not gonna accept it. They're not gonna accept it, and companies are going to have to take responsibility for it, and it has to be in a genuine way.
Will say as well with accountability, there is also consumer accountability and audience accountability to just not letting these companies drop the ball and actually following through and looking at a couple of years later. You know, at my company, with the work that we do on our DEI committee, I'm always sure when we are looking at our brands to bring up to, I work at a digital marketing agency, and we work with some of the biggest brands in the world, and when we do something for a social cause, we're always advising our brands and our clients that, listen, in 2 years, there are people here who are going to follow the money, who are going to follow the action. And of course, we are very excited for you to do this and be a part of this, but just make sure you've charted this out. Make sure you have a long vision so that you can do accountability, because there is an increasing amount of demand for accountability, but also as consumers, definitely have to recommend that you continue to hold your brands that you love accountable for what they say that they're going to do. Follow that money, follow that progress, follow that step. Don't let them drop the ball, and don't be afraid to hold them accountable, because that's the only way that we're actually going to make real change.
Right. So this question can be really for, but I'll address it to you, Corinne. So how do companies strike that balance between addressing societal issues and remaining focused on their primary business objectives?
Ooh, that's a big question. I'm glad that can be addressed to anybody. I'll start and then I'll pass the mic as quickly as possible. No, thank you for that incredible question. You know, I think it really does come back to what I said earlier about authenticity and alignment. It's really about, you know, choosing to align yourself as a company with social causes and issues that do feel aligned to your broader business objectives, whether that be acquiring a new audience or retaining your existing one. Now, there have been many cases and that where companies or brands that, you know, were afraid to alienate their existing audience by jumping on a social cause that, you know, in turn would then also potentially recruit a new audience. But just understanding that new audience recruitment, especially if you are kind of leveraging your involvement with a social issue, takes a long time, because back to accountability and trust, you have to sort of show that there's a genuine story behind this. There's a genuine reason why you're doing it. In order for it to really serve your broader business objectives. So it's kind of understanding that it's going to take time. It's going to take time, especially if it's a new story and a new alignment, for people to really believe that this is the right way. With that said, if time or also energy and resources invested in aligning yourself with people who are already doing this work. So it isn't a business or brand's responsibility to fully do the work of the cause. Remember that you are, as a brand, you're aligning yourself as an ally and as a driver with a platform to work that's already been done for decades on behalf of activists in those social issues. It is your job to support with a platform, not necessarily to drive the change, but to use what you have to amplify the change. And that should create a sort of avalanche of consumer action that ultimately supports your business objectives. It's great. The God's honest truth is that it's great for your PR, and that's not a secret. And more than anything, in terms of it being a PR and a conversation driver, it ultimately actually is great for retention, and it's great for, you know, just people to remember that you were real and you stood for something. I don't think that anybody is ever going to forget what Ben and Jerry's did in the wake of George Floyd's murder, and they continue to show up. They have continued to show up. It's 2023, it's been 3 years, and they were doing it before. But they got bigger, they got louder, they got better. And the biggest thing that they did is that they amplified voices rather than trying to be the voice entirely by themselves.
And that's key, the fact that they were doing it beforehand. But I'll bring up Bud Light, for example. That, I mean, they talk about an audience that they didn't know. It was like they didn't know who their audience was, and they didn't know how to speak to them. And aligning with your values, they went way off topic by trying to include trans people in their marketing when their audience doesn't even believe that people should be trans. And so I think it's also important to figure out how within their audience can they message them in a social impact way. So how can they relate to more conservative groups to change, you know, societal issues, but that don't go as far as like, okay, now you have to support trans people, and then you end up alienating both sides because you alienate conservative sides as well as progressives because they fired the marketing team that came up with the idea. So that just kind of goes to your question of aligning your values with your mission and you as a company.
Yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, just to add on that, I would definitely say it's also important to know that if you're going to take action and you want to be a part of the change, that do something you know you can have lasting impact. You do not need to be the voice, but like you were saying before, be an ally of the voice. You know, when it came, going back to Pride Fest, when it came to that, it was the grassroots movement because it was year one, never done before. So there was no marketing, there was no PR, there was no media. And so when it came to my company, and it comes to our industry as marketing, a lot of our skill set is also driving exposure, driving the eyeballs. And so my company, seeing there was an opportunity there where we weren't necessarily in a position where we could allocate so much financial resources to make this happen, but actually allocate some team members who were more than happy, more than willing to be a media team, to provide this coverage, to give them a voice that they need, to amplify their voice. So it's not necessarily about being the sole voice, but it's also about amplifying. It's also about being an ally. And like you were saying, it's about standing by. And to not just, if there is trouble, to not just abandon the cause that you so publicly supported. Because when you stick by a cause, when you stick by the change, that's when change happens.
Oops, never mind.
Also, this might be a really hot take, but standing for something and standing for social issues sometimes doesn't have to mean that you are out with that social issue in the most explicit and aggressive way. I do a lot of work in the influencer marketing space, and in that space, one of the biggest things, again, back to sort of George Floyd and sort of diversifying the partners and the influencers that the brands were working with at that time, and sort of they were all having these kind of quick response panics of like, oh, all of our influencers are not black, and what do we need to do? And you know, then started basically just, it was a quick thing. They threw a bunch of money at us to be like, find influencers, go put it on the page. And that in and of itself kind of backfires, because I mean, your internet archive is there. People understand that this is new and this is something you're doing responsibly. And so when it comes to what does it look like to align with a social issue, sometimes it's quietly. Sometimes it's just, hey, our page is full of different faces and different people. I think a community that gets forgotten about all the time when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion, and social issues is the disabled communities. And you know, there are so many incredible influencers out there who are in wheelchairs and who are physically disabled in multiple ways and who have built huge platforms and huge followings. And you have brands who look out there and just go, yeah, but you know, is that really who we're catering to? And the truth is, yes, it is, because you're catering to human beings. That's not going to show up on your marketing brief. You're not going to say, oh, we're specifically, you know, if you're a soda brand, we're specifically catering people with disabilities. No, but people with disabilities drink soda, so why wouldn't you have an influencer that has a disability drinking a soda? So it's not always about, you know, being so loud and proud with your social stance, as it is also about just making sure that people feel seen and accounted for in the lifestyles that you're representing through your marketing. And that should work well for your business.
Thank you. And so we've heard a little bit about some of the risks, you know, Bud Light, thinking about them, of taking a social stand. But how can companies better prepare to take those risks? And are there any benefits to standing up on societal issues? That's for anybody.
I can go. So my agency, Better Together, we focus on using communications to achieve equity, and we advise a lot of for-profit companies, large companies, on what they should do to be authentic when it comes to their public relations efforts and proving that they really do care about DEI. And the strategy that we propose a lot of the times is that they actually go out into the community and they ask the people what they can do to show that they care about DEI. So instead of a company saying, okay, I think this is what people want, so this is what we're gonna do. Instead, they ask them, like, hey, how can we actually show it? And then they say, okay, we're gonna set these goals, this is what we're gonna do. They're gonna be public about what the goals are, and they're gonna say, okay, hold us accountable with those goals. And then they're gonna say, oops, like we didn't do it right, we messed up, we're gonna try again. But the thing is just being open and honest, again, comes back to trust, authenticity, and just being open to not knowing everything, not knowing exactly what you should do, but being able to ask the public what you should do.
Not knowing is so key, and just being okay with not knowing. Being okay with asking the question. I think one of the biggest things that we encounter is a lot of brands are new to this space, and again, sort of pre-George Floyd, we're like, oh, well, we don't want to, you know, we don't want to be too political, we don't want to, you know, take that stance, and now they're in a space where the pressure is on to take that stance, especially again with the younger generations. And it is okay to admit that you don't know. It's also okay to admit that you were doing it wrong. Most consumers in this generation who care about social issues would rather a brand say, hey, we've been doing this wrong. We've been making mistakes. We're ready to learn. We're ready to ask the right questions. We're ready to give over our platform. We're not gonna do it perfectly, but perfection isn't our goal. Our goal is growth. Our goal is to learn and do better. And we know we can't please everybody, but our goal also isn't to please everybody. Our goal here is to be the best versions of ourselves that we can be to make a collective better society. That's going to look different to everybody, but as long as we continue to collect the information, not act impulsively, be proactive in our strategies rather than reactive, rather than waiting for a specific time of year or a specific time and place, and just listening. There are so many incredible organizations and advocates who have already done this work for brands and businesses. It's out there. Free information all over the internet, all over. All you have to do is be willing to deploy your resources to collect that information. And now I know the previous talk was just about artificial intelligence. I mean, it's as easy as a prompt now. Like, it is so, you can generate an entire plan on addressing any social issue in the world with one prompt. So there's really just no reason not to say, I don't know, but I'm willing to learn.
Definitely don't wait until Black History Month. Plus, I have to say it's the shortest month of the year, so.
Amen, sis.
Did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I would definitely say that it's a tough position to be in, and the pressure is on, but one of the things you notice is that companies and businesses, whether you're big or small, are always afraid to ask that question of, what can we do differently, or what should I be doing differently? And it's about being able to put yourself in a space where you can take that critique, where you could actually open your mind and open your ears to hear, okay, maybe there's something I'm doing that I'm not realizing in my business that's causing this reaction. Maybe there's something we've been doing in the past that I'm not really aware of that's causing this. Or maybe it opens your eyes to realize, wow, this is the impact of my company's actions. And it's about being able to accept the criticism, but also put yourself in a position where you can find answers. And like you were saying, there are many organizations who have done it right, but there are also a plethora of organizations who are willing to help you do it right, who are willing to help you find those answers that work for you. Every business is different, which means every solution is different. And so you shouldn't be running a business on a response basis, on saying, oh, this happened, now I must do something. It should be, how can we actively be running a company in a way that has positive impacts on society, not negative impacts.
To build on that too, there are a plethora of businesses who have done it right. There are also a plethora of businesses who have done it wrong. Yeah. And it is just as important to learn from those than it is to learn from the ones that are doing it right. Even more important, exactly, because, and of course, again, some businesses will get into that space where they'll see the one that does it wrong and they'll go, oh, I wouldn't want to be that guy, so it's better to just run and not do it at all. But that's not true. You just have to listen to the feedback. And you know, this is going, again, maybe to be a hot take, but I'd rather see a business that does it wrong and then takes accountability and then approaches it right than a business that does it wrong and then retreats and you never hear from them on another social issue again. Because you can really make a lot of social change as a business by doing it wrong and allowing that example and that accountability to fuel better applications for not only your business, but for the other businesses that are out there.
Agreed. And to build off of that real quick, you're going to find yourself in a position where if you keep waiting, that's the wrong. The inaction will become the wrong. And so you can be in a position where you've seen other companies make these mistakes and you go, okay, that's not for me. I don't want that reaction. And if you don't take the time to learn from those mistakes that other companies have made and even make an attempt, your inaction is going to be the new wrong.
Yeah, well, I have to build on that. But I do think planning is very, very important. So if something, say you are being reactive and you just start doing things, like that can be also a downfall as well. So putting it in your yearly plans, like just making it a part of who you are as a company. It shouldn't be some extra section in the plan. It should just be in everything that you do. And so I think that becomes more authentic and true and all that as well.
I would love to just do a quick build on that. I'm so sorry. I know we have to keep it moving. Last thing on that is that, you know, I know we've been talking a lot about brands overall and thinking about big brands, but I love what you just said, Catherine. In my business and at my agency, agency, we have what we call special projects, and it's sort of our internal teams do a lot of different things. So there's like Project Curious that takes care of learning sessions for the team. There's Project Spirit that takes care of like holiday stuff, and there's, you know, different ones. And Project Grow that takes care of new business. And when we really introduced diversity, equity, and inclusion in a very, very formal way, which I'll admit was following the murder of George Floyd, when we introduced that, one of the first things that our CEOs said was, we don't want to consider this a special project. Yes, it is a project, but this is integrated into the fabric of everything that we do, whether that's our client service and our client-facing business, or if as it applies to all the special projects. So now we actually go as the leads of the diversity, equity, and inclusion team, and we go and have meetings with all of the special project leads, the Project Curious leads, the Best in Class leads, the Project Spirit leads, and we go, how can we bring diversity, equity, and inclusion to the forefront of every single initiative that you guys are doing? And it has made a huge difference, even down to the holiday parties and the stuff that we do in the donation. Like, we really think about diversity and equity and inclusion and social issues across the board in the organization, and it's really been an incredible way to apply things. It's not perfect, but even having that intentionality in the internal mechanics of the business, that's not advertised. That's not for us taking a stand in the outside world, but that internal work we're doing is creating a better product in what we are advertising.
All right, those are great builds. You could do another one? Maybe we'll come back. So, more questions for you. You mentioned doing the right thing, doing the wrong thing. I'm going to leave Bud Light alone. So we'll talk about Target, for example, because they've gotten a lot of backlash. They've taken some hits as well for some of their campaigns. And they did do the planning, and they have been known for doing a lot of good things, taking a stand on societal issues, and then, you know, all of a sudden they got hit recently with some negative backlash. And so you talked about learning from some of those mistakes. How can other companies learn from a company like Target, who's consistently done things well, but then also taken some hits for doing something quote unquote wrong?
Yeah, and I think that that's the point, is that they've done stuff well. It wasn't just this one time where they tried to do something new and it went wrong, but they have consistently over the years. Like when I first learned about the crisis with Target, I was like, oh, that's so strange. Like Target, like they always do something great. And so I think that's the key. That's how, like we've said on the panel, that's what companies can do. They just have to do this consistently. And so I think Target's going to recover. They're going to be fine. I think they are fine now, but that's because consumers know their real purpose and mission and values, and that they didn't intentionally like do something that was out of character. And so I think companies just in general can learn from planning ahead, as well as just being transparent and honest about what they're doing moving forward.
Could we just quickly recap for the audience the Target case, just in like a short?
Yeah, you can.
So if you're not aware, recently, right before Pride Month, Target released some merchandise, some of it being clothing for kids, and they got a lot of backlash.
It was in the kids.
Well, in the kids section.
But, and the woman was like, oh,
yeah.
This is for kids.
But yeah, it was in the kids section, and people took it and they ran with it, and they said that they were trying to indoctrinate kids, to turn them gay, and you know.
Got it.
Yeah. So people just, it made it bigger than it really was. They weren't targeting kids.
Yeah, I mean, what are they supposed to do? Like someone probably tried it on, put it in some random place in their store. Someone gets their camera out, starts like saying, this is just by the, strollers or something, and then it just goes viral. So you have to, in those crisis situations, you have to have your crisis team ready, you have to have your crisis plan ready. But that's gonna happen, You can try to prevent things so much, but crises are going to happen. I love crises, so if anybody has one.
It's exceptionally difficult for multinational brands that are, I mean, it's no secret how polarized this country and this world is when it comes to these major social issues. So understanding, A, you cannot do everything right. B, those moments are going to happen. We in our business in strategy and PR, whenever you are able to do that sort of proactive planning, your publicists and your teams do try to do risk assessment across the entire spectrum of risk and have responses prepared for every single if, and, or but. And then sometimes the thing that you just didn't write down happens, and that's the thing that goes viral. It's very, very difficult to do something and to not alienate somebody. And I mean, this might be a personal preference, but would, again, 20 out of 10 rather see a brand, especially a multinational corporation, taking a stand and representing and involving communities and being okay with that sacrifice of whomever you might be alienating on that side in order to create a more inclusive world. And just sort of trusting that, again, if you continue to do this consistently, and I think that's really the most important key word that Catherine has brought up a few times, you continue to do this consistently and keep learning and keep growing and stand by what you are doing, that your audience, your consumers are going to grow with you, because we are only, like, this is a battle that the consumers, the progressive consumer wants to win, and you will get support loud and proud if you continue to be loud and proud.
Okay. So there are so many different societal issues. We talked a lot about diversity, equity, and inclusion today, but there's climate change, there's all of the ESG kinds of issues, there's other racial equity issues, economic inclusion, so many issues. How do companies decide what issues to address and when not to do anything?
I could take this one. I would say a lot of the key decision-making process, at least for me, is what impact can my action have? There are a lot of issues that I feel like my company is not best situated for to take on, but there are issues where I know that should we get involved, should we help support, should we be an ally, that we can actually make real progress. Like when it came to covering media for the Pride Fest, that was fantastic. I'm so grateful and fortunate we were able to do that. But there are smaller things we can do too, like Driven Media goes and we interview local food pantries so we can spotlight awareness and attention on them. And I think that what happens now is that people get so caught up in like the big three main societal issues that are going on, but there are plenty of other societal issues where people can really get involved. And so when it's about choosing what to be involved in, how to help, how to show support, I would honestly start with saying, where could my company have real impact? Where could we make a real difference? And that doesn't mean the difference has to be huge. It could be little, but you have to start somewhere. So where can we start off where we can actually not do something and say, hey, look what we did, but where can we do something that actually means something? When we interviewed food pantries, the fact that we brought attention to food pantries, just for example, one in Cheshire, Connecticut, was truly instrumental around Thanksgiving time to let citizens in the area and surrounding townships know that there were Thanksgiving baskets ready for families in need. And driving exposure and awareness so people can celebrate Thanksgiving the way they deserve, to me, that's something that is so tangible, so easy to do, and it has real impact. And to me, there's not even an ounce of controversialness to it. Like people, it's feeding people. Right.
They're vegan. People able to feed themselves, Jack.
Well, we have one client, they work in higher education, and affirmative action, was overturned by Supreme Court, was it last week, I think? And what?
I said eye roll.
I know. And it took so much for us to get the client to put out a statement. Like, they're in higher education, that's their audience. Like, that's a time where you need to respond. Like, okay, if it's abortion, maybe not. Maybe they don't need to respond about that. But when your sole focus of an organization is around higher education, and affirmative action is overturned, you might want to say something. And
maybe a good
they
idea.
were waiting on Harvard to say something. Like, why are you waiting? You're not Harvard.
Like
so.
yes, 100%. I think the last thing I'll add to that is just don't try to do everything. I mean, you know, and also back to the authenticity space. Your business, your brand, you know, whether it aligns with what the individuals and the collective that make up the leadership there really care for, or whether it'll, you know, what you're making in your product, it's sort of, again, integrated into that. For example, if you make sustainable products or whatever it is that sort of feels right for you, that you can be the most authentic and impactful. I love that you led with impact, is super important. Trying to do everything at once and spreading yourself too thin, again, I think that attacks the authenticity, and it also attacks the accountability, because frankly, we can't, especially smaller businesses. I mean, multinational corps, there's a lot you can do. There's a lot, and sometimes they get away with being like, well, you can't do everything. And you're like, I've seen your budgets. You can do quite a bit. You can do quite a bit. But with the smaller or mid-sized businesses, you know, trying to do everything, trying to take on everything, unless you really are, you know, that is your business, is going to present more challenges than it is going to present help. And then I know I spoke a little bit earlier, just in the nature of the business that I'm in when it comes to influencer marketing and representation. Again, just being comfortable with the fact that this is not something that you always have to be speaking so explicitly about the social issue in order to make that impact and that change. As Jack said, it doesn't have to be the hugest impact when it, you know, of course I believe we need to go beyond just representation and representational marketing, but it's a great start to just make sure that you are not, just because you think you know your consumer, that you're not alienating the experiences of the consumer that, you know, could overlap. There's so much intersectionality. People are more than one thing. And so you don't have to be a loud and proud advocate for every LGBTQIA+, every, you know, racial justice issue, every environmental sustainability issue, et cetera, but just have that presence in your pages and in your channels that shows that you see the world as whole. And that's a great place to start.
Yeah, and I'm going to piggyback off that.